Hi guys, Claudia here, and today we're going to talk about the 6th of May, 1536. Now this is one I've been quite excited for because today we're going to look at a letter supposedly sent by Anne. Now this is one of those big historical mysteries because we do not know to this day whether this is a genuine letter from Anne or whether this is a forgery. So a book I found really helpful when looking at this letter is a book by Ridgway called The Fall of Anne Boleyn, A Countdown. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read you this letter and I'm going to talk about how likely this is that this really was from Anne. Now, the specific information you need to know about this letter is that if it was from Anne, it never made it to the king, even though it was to the king. It was found among Cromwell's files and papers in the 17th century, with all his letters from Kingston, who was reporting on Anne for him at the Tower. So if this is a real letter from Anne, then it looks like Cromwell never passed this on. But again, as much as I hate to defend Cromwell, it is also possible that this letter is a complete fake. You can imagine the level of interest in this time period, even for people for whom it was their recent history. So as we saw with Thomas Wyatt's grandson and the stories he was telling, it seemed like he kind of twisted the truth a little and made things more romantic, wanted to add to the story to make it more of a legend, more of a myth. We have to be aware of that interest because there have been lots of forgeries in the case of Anne Boleyn and her writings. We have so few letters from Anne that we can be completely sure were actually authored by her. Now bear in mind when I read this letter, supposing that it is true, Anne is not able to see her husband. She's not able to talk to the king. The last time she saw him was at May Day, and they didn't discuss the charges. They didn't discuss this whole situation. She's not in contact with any of the other men. She's not in contact with George. It does seem likely that in this situation she would have wanted to write a letter, because even if she wasn't allowed to see the king, she is such a high status person that Kingston wouldn't really have been able to refuse her this request. And I think if you or I were in that situation, it's also what most of us would do. We would try desperately to get in touch with Henry and put our side across. Remember, Anne knows that the king is being advised by all her enemies now. Her friends and the people who would stand up for her are pretty much already in the Tower. So the letter is headed, "To the king from the lady in the Tower." And if this is a real document, then that would have been added by Thomas Cromwell. Let's begin. "Sir, your grace's displeasure and my imprisonment are things so strange unto me, as what to write or what to excuse, I am altogether ignorant. Whereas you sent unto me, willing me to confess a truth, and so obtain your favour, by such a one, whom you know to be my ancient and professed enemy, I no sooner received the message by him, than I rightly conceived your meaning. And if, as you say, confessing truth indeed may procure my safety, I shall, with all willingness and duty, perform your command." So the first part is pretty easy to understand. "Sir, your grace's displeasure and my imprisonment are things so strange unto me, as what to write or what to excuse, I am altogether ignorant." Anne is basically saying this situation is so strange and unexpected that she doesn't know what to say. Now she talks about such a one whom you know to be my ancient and professed enemy. She is talking about her uncle, so this is horrible Uncle Norfolk. She's really upset that the king, knowing their history and knowing how awful he's been to her and how much he hates her, that the king would send him to tell her that she's going to be arrested. She also says that if confessing truth indeed may procure my safety, I shall with all willingness and duty perform your command. So essentially, if this is what has to happen to prove her innocence, then she will do it. Here's the next part. "But let not your grace ever imagine that your poor wife will ever be brought to acknowledge a fault, where not so much as thought thereof proceeded. And to speak a truth, never prince had wife more loyal in all duty and all true affection than you have found in Anne Boleyn, with which name and place could willingly have contented myself, as if God and your grace's pleasure had been so pleased. Neither did I at any time so far forge myself in my exaltation, or received queenship, but that I always looked for such an alteration as now I find, for the ground of my preferment being on no surer foundation than your grace's fancy. The least alteration, I knew, was fit and sufficient to draw that fancy to some other subject." So Anne is saying here that she will not be brought to acknowledge a fault where there is none. She will not tell the world she is guilty to please him because she hasn't done anything wrong. She says a prince never had a wife more loyal in duty and affection than she. And she says here, "Neither did I at any time so far forge myself in my exaltation or received queenship." Now the way I interpret that is her saying that she didn't raise herself to this position. This was what he wanted. He did the chasing. She is maintaining that she never looked to be queen. Henry chose to place her there. It's interesting here as well that she talks about the king drawing that fancy to some other subject. Is this here a reference to Jane Seymour? Anne at this point would have known that the king had an eye for her. She would have known that when she was at court. Anne is very bright. There's no way she couldn't have known that the king has someone else lined up to replace her. And of course we have to remember that this is what happened with Catherine of Aragon when Henry decided to go after Anne instead. Now in that situation it can be perceived to be slightly different, because I do personally believe that Henry did think he was cursed for marrying his brother's wife. But still you can't help but imagine reading this, if this is real, that Anne is thinking on that. Anne is thinking about how fickle the king can be, how he can declare himself loyal and loving to somebody, and then the next day it's all changed. She goes on to say, "You have chosen me from a low estate to be your queen and companion, far beyond my desert or desire. If then you found me worthy of such honour, good your grace, let not any light fancy or bad counsel of mine enemies withdraw your princely favour from me. Neither let that stain, that unworthy stain of a disloyal heart towards your good grace, ever cast so foul a blot on your most dutiful wife, and the infant princess your daughter." So you have chosen me from a low estate. Anne was not a princess, she was a lady in waiting. Again, it's Henry who raised her. She says it's far beyond her desert or desire, and that means that she never grew up wanting to be queen, and she never really felt that she deserved it. But she says that he found her so worthy then that he made her his queen, that it seems to be bad counsel from her enemies that has taken his favour away. And here she talks about the infant princess your daughter. She is talking about her beloved Elizabeth. Now again, this is going to be something Anne's thinking about a lot, because when the marriage to Catherine of Aragon was annulled, we know that Mary was made illegitimate. Mary was treated very harshly by Henry, and hers is one of the most tragic stories of the Tudor era in my opinion. And as she was a Catholic and Catherine of Aragon's daughter, somebody who stood as an obstacle to Anne and her reformist beliefs and her rise, Anne wasn't very kind to Mary either. She knows how Henry can treat his children, and now she is so scared that this is going to happen to Elizabeth. She then says, "Try me, good king, but let me have a lawful trial, and let not my sworn enemies sit as my accusers and judges. Yes, let me receive an open trial, for my truth shall fear no open shame. Then you shall see, either mine innocency cleared, your suspicion and conscience satisfied, the ignominy and slander of the world stopped, or my guilt openly declared, so that whatsoever God or you may determine of me, your grace may be freed from an open censure. And mine offence being so lawfully proved, your grace is at liberty, both before God and man, not only to execute worthy punishment on me as an unlawful wife, but to follow your affection already settled on that party, for whose sake I am now as I am, whose name I could some good while since have pointed unto, your grace being not ignorant of my suspicion therein." So here she begs for a lawful trial. We know that she laughed when Kingston said that all of Henry's subjects will have a fair trial. Anne knows it's not going to be fair. She knows that she is going to be judged by her enemies, and unfortunately this will go on to happen. There's also a sense here, if this is real, that Anne really knows Henry's personality, his paranoia, how easily he's swayed. I think Henry is quite afraid of the wrath of God and of offending God. And so here she's saying, well, put me on an open trial, make it fair, and then you will see for yourself. If you are right, then let me be punished. It will be proved. But that can only be proved if she has a fair trial. You can understand reading this why Cromwell might not have wanted this to get to the king. And not just to the king, he would not have wanted this in the public domain, because Anne is saying, fine, put me on trial, make it an open trial. This shows that the king and Cromwell are trying to make it as private and difficult as possible. Now this last bit, I really don't know if this is real or not. I think it's a little bit too much the stuff of romance, the stuff of drama to be real. But she talks about the king following his affection already settled on that party. She is talking about Jane Seymour. She says here, whose name I could some good while since have pointed unto, your grace being not ignorant of my suspicion therein. So this is a wife who has seen her husband wanting to stray. I'm quite sure that Henry probably gaslit her, so he would be assuring her that everything was fine while he was seeing Jane. Anne has had her suspicions for a long time, and here she is saying that she was right. She then says, but if you have already determined of me, and that not only my death, but an infamous slander must bring you the enjoying of your desired happiness, then I desire of God that he will pardon your great sin therein, and likewise mine enemies, the instruments thereof, that he will not call you to a strict account for your unprincely and cruel usage of me, and his general judgment seat, where both you and myself must shortly appear, and in whose judgment I doubt not, whatsoever the world may think of me. mine innocence shall be openly known and sufficiently cleared. Anne talks about Jane again here when she says, but an infamous slander must bring you the enjoying of your desired happiness. So she's saying, I see that you must slander me in order to have your happiness with Jane. And here again she turns to her religion and her faith in God. She says that if the king does this, if he goes through with this plot against her, then he will be in trouble with God and he will have committed a sin. She says here that whatever the world may think of her, her innocence will be known. So even if she doesn't get a fair trial here on earth, in heaven she knows she will be found innocent, and all the people that worked against her will be held to account for that. Lastly, she goes on to say, my last and only request shall be, that myself may only bear the burden of your grace's displeasure, and that it may not touch the innocent souls of those poor gentlemen, who, as I understand, are likewise in strait imprisonment for my sake. If ever I have found favour in your sight, if ever the name of Anne Boleyn hath been pleasing to your ears, then let me obtain this request. And I will so leave to trouble your grace any further, with mine earnest prayers to the Trinity, to have your grace in his good keeping, and to direct you in all your actions. This is selfless, and this is Anne thinking about all those other poor men who have been implicated with her. She is saying that if she has brought about his displeasure, if he does feel like he needs to punish her, then please spare those other men who are innocent. And last of all, she says that she's going to pray for him. She's going to pray that God guides him to do the right thing. She signs off, your most loyal and ever faithful wife, Anne Boleyn, from my Dolson prison, the Tower, this 6th of May. Now, I personally find this fascinating. I like the spirit that's in this letter. It does seem to fit with Anne's outspokenness, her intelligence, but I have to admit, I lean more on the side that this is probably a forgery. Now, some who say this letter is a forgery say that it must be a forgery because it is not written in Anne's known handwriting. But as Claire Ridgway says in a countdown, it could easily be that this letter was dictated by Anne and written by one of the ladies in waiting, or even written for her by Sir William Kingston. Some people have said that the letter isn't in her usual style when compared to her other letters, so the actual linguistic style of it. But again, that's not really evidence either way, because Anne has been experiencing this traumatic, life-changing event. She's the most scared she's ever been. She's experiencing a mental breakdown. That could also be a reason why the style is slightly different. And again, if it's being dictated for her by someone else, then it might not be in her exact phrasing. Now, something a lot of people who argue that it's a forgery say is that if it was real, surely Cromwell would have disposed of it. And yes, I do tend to agree with that thinking, because from what we know of Cromwell, it does seem unlikely he would leave a letter like that for other people to find. But that being said, it was found with his letters from Kingston, and the thing with history is that we can't know anything for sure. We're kind of like detectives trying to look at the context and the personalities to figure things out from the information that we have. But of course, we can never really predict what people are going to do. Now, of course, it seems unlikely that Cromwell would have kept this letter, but we can't say for sure that he didn't. If it's real, he might have kept that letter for any reason. It could have been a trophy. It might have been because it was such a huge historical event and he wanted to keep something to do with it. Is it spiteful? Is it his power? Is it his triumph, thinking that he's stopped this getting to the king? And even if this is a real letter, it might not be the real copy. It could be in different handwriting, because perhaps this is a copy made for Cromwell. In this letter, Anne signs herself Anne Boleyn, and she spells Boleyn B-U-L-L-E-N, which is an alternate spelling for Boleyn. In the Tudor times, they had lots of different alternate spellings for names, but usually she would sign herself off as Anne the Queen. And again, that is a compelling argument as to why this is a forgery, but we can't be absolutely sure it's a forgery, because it might be that now she is in the Tower, she feels she no longer is Queen. It might be a message to Henry about how humble she was, to remind him that he raised her. In my own personal opinion, I do think this letter is a forgery. I think it's too dramatic. I think it's an imaginative piece of creative writing written after the events. I've no doubt that that is the sort of thing she would say to Henry. I don't doubt that at all. I can't help but wonder if she would perhaps mention George more specifically by name if this was real. If she thinks this is the only way she can communicate the king her last letter to him, then just for me personally, it doesn't feel quite right that she just refers to those gentlemen in the Tower. Now, it could be that she doesn't want to draw Henry's fire towards George. With Henry being the sort of person he is, it is reasonable to assume that maybe Anne might not have wanted to draw his rage, and once again to show him exactly where he can strike to hurt her the most, which is George. But I do feel there is something just slightly impersonal about this letter. It almost feels too Shakespearean, like it's part of the drama, part of the play and the pageantry of it all. Something about it just instinctively does not ring true. That's for me. And again, we know that it only came to light in the 17th century. Where was it until then, and why did it not come out sooner? But you might think differently on that. Historians are undecided. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I will see you tomorrow for the 7th of May video. I've been putting links on the end of my videos that you can click on. I'm going to try and put it up here, but I'm so bad with this kind of thing that I don't know if it'll be out there. This is a music video and a track I wrote about Anne and George, because I do actually write music. Some of you might know that, some of you might not. And my music is very inspired by Anne and other historical women, by the relationship between Anne and George. So if you want to check that out, that's what that is. And that's why there's always a link to that on the end of these, because it might be relevant to this subject. Kate, love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Bye!